And one of the things I have to give him credit for is that he did do recovery work. He went in 12-step group. He got counseling himself after he had acted out with other guys and had to leave the pastorate back when I was about 14 years old.
Welcome to Relevant Christianity. I'm glad that you have joined us today. I have a very special guest with a fascinating story. He's living proof that God brings beauty from ashes. You know, in my life, I think given life circumstances, we find it difficult sometimes to die to self. And it wasn't until, 40 years down the road that I recognized that I was doing all the controlling and I really needed God. And so doing that, requires a full surrender of self, and that's not easy. So in this life, it's we get caught up in our uh, different pleasures and persuasions, and it's hard to let somebody else take control. But I have been very blessed with the various people that I've had on this program. And I think that today you'll be very blessed by listening to Jason Mellard, who has quite the story. Jason, thank you so much for joining Relevant Christianity and taking the time to share with us. You had a pretty interesting childhood, and I wonder if you could share with the audience, some of your earliest childhood memories.
You bet. Thank you, Wayne, for having me on today. And
Absolutely.
I love to be able to share what God has done in my life and in the lives of other people. Truly is inspiring. I think the reason that I love the work that I get to do to help other men navigate their same-sex attractions and live into God's full plan for them is because I get to know God more through the process.
Yes.
And, as we dig into my story, I've gotten to know God so much more by getting curious about the hard things in my life and maybe some of those lies that Satan handed me in those places of vulnerability. It's the reason I think we're here on earth is to know Christ more and to make him known. So for anybody that's
Amen.
listening that, may have a hard time looking at difficult things in your life, I want you to know that God was there, he is there, and when you look at those things, I know that you can meet him there as well. He'll meet you there. And I had a lot of hard stuff growing up.
Yeah.
I
So your
had,
early beginnings were well, I don't know that they're that much different than some today, but certainly from, when I was younger, that, there's certainly different levels of abuse, but probably not from the same place where you experienced yours. Tell me or tell our audience what occurred in your childhood.
my father was my abuser, and he was also the pastor of my church. We went to a small Baptist church in the country. We lived in the parsonage. We would be able to walk to church across this little footbridge, and our backyard was a ravine. And we loved going across the footbridge on Sunday mornings. We also had a rope swing that we swing from that, and the whole neighborhood came over to do that. So there were so many opportunities for just a beautiful childhood, but my dad was troubled, and he tried to get something from me, from pornography, from different things that only God could give him. I think that's a great
Mm,
definition of sin, right? Trying to get from something else what only God can give. And I think what was so hard about the experience of abuse, especially from my father, is there are so many confusing messages that can send. As people, we are just meaning making machines. When you're a kid, especially, you're trying to make sense of the world, all these new experiences that are happening. And when it's something like abuse, I don't know what to make of my dad touching me in a place where it just doesn't feel quite right,
mhm.
and not feeling like I have a say in the matter or have a voice to raise my hand and ask for something else besides
Yeah.
that. And
And
when I did, it wasn't received well.
this began at what age?
About ages 5 to 11, I'd say this went on. And, I say it wasn't anything X-rated. It doesn't mean that it was not terribly unfortunate and traumatic, just
Yeah.
because there, weren't some things that could have been a lot worse. But I think often it's not necessarily what happens, but it's those lies, like I said, that get ingrained in our body that we have to live our life
Yeah. So
bearing and kind of living out of.
the indentation that it makes at such a young age is really quite severe. So
Yeah.
even if it's inappropriate touching or nudity
Hmm.
without penetration or things like that, I think I understand what you're saying. It doesn't have to
Correct.
be extreme, but it still is an introduction to you're sharing your private part of your body with someone, and you're not quite sure that that's who you're supposed to be involving yourself with.
Right.
I have an upcoming documentary called Freedom, and I spoke to an LGBT activist who is also a pastor who told me that trauma does not shape whether or not somebody is inclined to be same-sex attracted. What would you say to that claim?
I look at patterns. So, my friends in life that have experienced same-sex attraction, my wife, myself, my father, I've seen trauma in all the stories,
Hmm.
but I also don't want to say that that's 100%. I
Hmm.
think sometimes the origin is less important than the fact that, well, okay, we've got this thing. What are we going to do with it? But I can say what I believe is the biggest driver of unwanted same-sex attraction is a belief and feeling of separateness. That's how I like to kind of encapsulate something that is very complex. And I do feel like there are so many different factors that can go into it. But when I work with guys that experience this, it can be overwhelming to think about all these different things. And so just the idea of separateness for me is a helpful way to simplify it. And what I mean by that is this feeling like I'm separate from my body. Just like I said, when somebody thinks that they can touch me in a place that really just belongs to me, then, I'm kind of separate from my body. I don't have complete, ownership of it. Or different times there was physical abuse. I felt like I just had to kind of float above my body for a bit.
Hmm.
Or, separate from my voice. I didn't get a say in what was happening to me. I also felt separate from masculinity, felt like I didn't belong, in the group of other guys. I was always looking at what they were doing and trying to copy it so that I could say I was man enough and try to get my man card. Felt separate from my strength, from God in many ways, from my father in a deep
Yeah.
way. I think that connection with the father is so important. We're trying to emulate that version of masculinity. I think so much of the time we just see our father as either the definition of masculinity or somebody that's bestowing that upon us.
Yeah.
And if I don't feel like he's really the person that I want to follow, or I don't feel like he's, giving me what I need in that regard, then that can lead to that feeling of separateness.
So we
Uh,
couldn't predict really that without that experience, whether or not you would have experienced same-sex attraction. However, it certainly was an introductory that probably led your mind to thinking about whether or not you should have these kinds of feelings with other boys or other men, right?
I was always under the belief that men were a mystery. When I was always trying to figure out how other guys worked, and they were just so mysterious
Mhm.
because I wasn't around a lot of guys. I had just a sister. I was really protected in this small community, and when I would go to school, other guys would be into things I just wasn't really into, or they'd be talking about stuff, and so I just felt like, oh, what do I need to do to be like them? And I was just kind of focused on them. And I don't know, I have a theory that when all those chemicals go off when you hit puberty, it's kind of like whatever you're focused on is maybe what they attach to. Again, that's just my theory. Like taking a love potion, whatever you look at afterwards, maybe is what you fall in love with. But I do. I think that girls really weren't hardly even on my radar because I hadn't figured out guys yet. I think a lot of times by the time, boys hit puberty, they've gotten bored with each other. And
Mhm.
then women come into their femininity in that time, and often boys are turning around like, oh, wait, who are these people? And maybe that's just how it's supposed to work and connect, but I hadn't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah.
So I was still trying to figure out the guys and where I fit into that world.
During those 6 years, um, what kinds of feelings or thoughts went through your mind? Was this something that happened on a regular basis? Did it bring, was there fear involved? Did you wonder how you really were supposed to relate to your dad? Or did you feel like you were really being dominated and you had to do whatever he told you to do?
Oh yeah, I was scared of him. He was much bigger than me. I hated him. Um, not all the time, but yeah,
Mm.
I mean, gosh, you want to be able to express how you're feeling to somebody. A huge part of knowing somebody and feeling safe is being safe enough to share your emotions and your feelings. And when you're a kid, you've got big emotions, big thoughts, and I felt like those were just all inside of me and they couldn't get out. And I felt really stuck with that. He would come into my bedroom at night and they're just weird things, like he would want us to just have our underwear on and lay next to each other. Or, I would have some sensations and experiences that were really weird. I didn't know what to do with, and they kind of felt good. And that was conflicting, of course. There were other, just strange things like, I'd be taking a shower and he'd come into the bathroom and just stare at me.
Yeah.
And I know I'm chuckling about it just because I like to lighten the mood a little bit, but yeah, it's bad. It's
Yeah.
bad because then I'm
So
told that, my appearance is something that I have to keep up, that maybe people are just seeing me for how I look or that something is not right there. And it did make for something really confusing. And I didn't know how to voice that to him or what to say. And when I did, I just got lectured for a long time about it. And he would say, gosh, Jason, then we're just not going to touch at all. So I wouldn't get hugs, for a week or two. Yeah, it sends a really difficult message to a young boy.
when you came into puberty and into your teens, what was your relationship like with other guys?
Detached. Yeah, I felt like I was on the outside looking in. Didn't know how to just be. I didn't know how to just be at all because I felt like I was told that who I was not enough. That was wrong. I couldn't express fully who I was. And I think a huge part of connecting with other guys is just kind of let your guard down, and to say, I'm like you, you're like me. And, I just didn't know how to just to be. I was then constantly putting on different kind of parts of them, just kind of pasting it onto myself. Okay, well, this guy talks like this, or this guy looks like this. And even when you're interacting with guys that way, like trying to mirror who they are or what they expect of you or what they think they expect of you, then you're not really living in the moment. And I think that kind of confuses other guys. They're like, well, why aren't you just here with us, Jason? They wouldn't know how to put words to that at that time, or they sense that I feel separate, and maybe that confuses them because, well, we're all guys, right? What's the big deal? So I don't know. And I think the fact that I was a pastor's kid, some of the guys kept me a little bit at a distance, because maybe they were cussing and doing the bad stuff. And I thought, okay, here comes Jason, the good kid. So we need to give him a little bit of room. I think that may have had something to do with it as well.
Did same-sex attraction begin to grow as you become an adult?
Right. So I didn't have any
Did you have
big,
exposure to the gay community at all, or
no, I didn't really have exposure to the gay community. And all of that stuff was just super scary. I got my sense of safety from being the good Christian. So any
uh-huh.
idea or thought of that was just kind of not on my radar. And I think I was suppressed sexually a bit just because of the things that happen. And so anything sexual, I was really trying to avoid. So it wasn't until I had an experience at the end of high school when I was at a party and another guy was sitting next to me and said that he wanted to kiss me that I had my first kind of flooding inside my body of emotion and feelings that came up from that. I didn't kiss him. I don't remember what happened, the rest of that night. I think I just got scared and probably moved away. But that freaked me out a little bit. That was inside my body, and I think I suppressed that pretty quick. And then it was more when I got into college that I couldn't seem to suppress or ignore some of the feelings that were coming up. And, I just would maybe see another guy and think, gosh, if I could be like that, if I was more confident like him, then I would feel safe. I would feel like I was enough. And then I would just find myself overwhelmed with some physical sensations, whether it felt like lightning, electricity passing through my body, or just some romantic feelings. It's not anything I asked for. It just was there. And what was really bad is the story I told myself about all of those things. That, oh, even more separate than other people or other guys. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken. And, those things weren't really helpful. I just kept that to myself. I tried to share it with a few folks, but it wasn't the most productive thing. And I did have my first exposure to a couple gay guys when a classmate invited me to dinner with one of his friends that was gay. They both were identified that way. And they were telling me that I was gay. I hadn't put that label on it or really thought about that. I just knew that I had these feelings that I didn't know what to do with. But I always really desired to be somebody that was strong for a woman and to have
Mm-hmm.
a relationship with a female. So I was a little bit taken aback when they gave me that declaration about who I was and what I was and what I needed
Confusion.
to
Yeah.
enter into. I was like, okay. And I don't know. I think though maybe they just thought they were doing me a favor. Obviously they were. I think they could see that I was troubled, and I was. I was very troubled, understandably so. But I was scared all the time. I was anxious. I wasn't truly present. I wasn't really authentic. And maybe they just felt like that was a piece of me that needed to get expressed, that I needed to live into, and that was going to help me feel more alive and more full.
Did you, so when you observed the masculinity and the what you would consider normalcy of another male, would you be drawn into having a crush on that individual at all? Did you explore that? Did you end up did you have a boyfriend for a period of time?
I never did. I never went into the lifestyle, never had a relationship. And in the crushes, uh, they were infrequent but present.
Hmm.
And that started to happen more in college. So I remember having a roommate that, no, was a nice guy, attractive. And I do remember one time specifically just walking across campus with him and just looking at him and having the feeling of a crush on
Hmm.
somebody.
Hmm.
And I think that's a little distinct from more of like that electricity feeling that comes up, super fast and maybe is more associated with what lust might feel like.
Sure.
I don't have to put that label on it, but that more intense feeling. The romantic feeling was more of like kind of wanting to be drawn in, wanting to know him more, just getting even more curious about him. He seemed
Yeah.
really mysterious. And that's unusual for most guys to
Hmm.
have,
Hmm.
towards a guy. Like I said,
Yeah.
I think a lot of guys just get bored with each other. And what is really mysterious to them are women. And honestly, it wasn't until women became a little bit more mysterious that I started to have some attractions towards women and really liked the idea of, to my wife in particular, of getting to know her more. As I met her, started getting the courage to ask her out on a date and having a lot less fear that I wasn't man enough for her, that I was going to, be hung up by these attractions that I still had to some degree with guys. But when
How
I
old
was
were
able to
you?
say, that was, we got married 15 years ago.
Okay.
And it really wasn't until 20 years ago, I was 27 at the time, that I first started to turn and look at my attractions productively. Prior to
Mhm.
that, I'd either suppress them or uh, just worked on sin management. I'm not going to, look at people lustfully, or I'm not going to look at porn. But a lot of what I was really dealing with in my young adult life was anxiety and depression. That was the thing that kept me stuck most. And I
Hmm.
did a lot of focused work on that first after I ended up in the emergency room at the end of undergrad with a nervous breakdown. I said, all right, I need to figure out what's going on. I started going to a 12-step group for friends and families of alcoholics. That was really beneficial. I went to counseling and I got to a place over several years that I felt a lot more grounded from just a day-to-day standpoint with anxiety and depression. And it was really a beautiful experience. I remember having a sponsor in Celebrate Recovery that was just beautiful, to me. And it was great to be able to share every secret in my life.
Were
And
you
that opened up a lot
drinking
of
or taking up
doors.
anything to get you through this confusion and all that was taking place, or were you pretty temperate?
I was a good kid. I was a good kid. Yeah, I was scared of drinking. Part of it, my dad had a problem with drinking, so I tried to stay
So
away.
biblically, you were really doing all the right things. I mean, you had that mapping in your childhood. The thing that really kind of steered you off course a little bit was the confusion under the sexual abuse that was taking place. But you sought out counsel, which is very interesting to me because of this documentary that I've been making for 3 years now, we're about ready to release, has to do with the topic of conversion therapy. Now, LGBT activists would say, "Oh, you were gay all along. You should just be who you are, and because you were curious, that shows right there that you were gay." But you went through a process of counseling, and so I want to hear more about how you arrived at the exploration and the indication that you thought that you wanted to follow through from a biblical standpoint, marry, and well, you can tell the story from there.
Sure. So early on, the counseling, like I said, was just to get more stable in life. But as I did, got a little bit more curious, worked with somebody one-on-one regarding same-sex attraction, and then, yeah, when I was 27, I'm 47 now, began going to support groups specifically for folks that had experienced same-sex attraction. And I got to be honest, it was one of the most beautiful times of my life because I'm entering into a place where, just gets me. They can finish my sentences almost. I don't have to try to explain, this thing to somebody that doesn't have the framework for it. It was really
So I'm
powerful.
sorry to interrupt. So in the counseling, instead of being told you needed to go and explore homosexuality, you are being led down a path of with biblical clarity and living according to God's ideals for you. Is that correct?
Yes, that was correct. Hmm.
And you were, as it sounds like you greatly benefited from this. You were not harmed. You were not, shock therapy and no aversive techniques or these kinds of things were done to you. Is that right?
Oh no, yeah, it was really great to be able to express where I was in life and what was important to me. Yeah, I would hate it if I went to a counselor and they were like, "Well, I know you kind of want to be, married to a woman, but no, or that's a terrible
Yeah.
idea."
Yeah.
I'll be like, "What are you talking about? This is what I care about right
Yeah.
here. I can't help, these sensations in my body. Um, my body doesn't get to define
Hmm.
what my true desires are. But my coaching program is called um, it's called Own Your Identity, and the
Yeah.
reason
And that's
is
your podcast name. Also, I wanted you to be able to
yes,
talk about your podcast. So
yeah.
you own your identity. We'll put up a link. And you before you go on and you do end up getting married, did you resolve the elements of abuse with your father?
It was important to me to have a relationship with him. And one of the things I have to give him credit for is that he did do recovery work. He went in 12-step group. He got counseling himself after he had acted out with other guys and had to leave the pastorate back when I was about 14 years old.
Hmm.
And so I really appreciated him setting the stage for that. And when I was really having a hard time in college, he said, "Hey, Jason, you may want to consider this." So I think it's important to give everybody credit for good and bad things, right?
I
Uh,
just in my mind, since I first saw your testimony the first time, I'm thinking, wow, what a incredible, indelible mark that makes on a person's life. And for you to come to a point that instead of being angry at him, you're able to reconcile in some way. And, if you can help another viewer understand how, I'm guessing that took a fair amount of
yeah.
forgiveness.
Some, forgiveness I felt like I was able to generate on my own, maybe just a tiny bit. I could say the words, I forgive you. But man, I was pissed at my dad for so long and then upset with my mom that, she didn't know everything that was happening. But, I don't know, she had to know something, right?
Yeah.
Or just I felt like, I wasn't protected. And so I had to grieve that. And she was somebody that also didn't know how to allow me to express, my emotions and to show up authentically because she didn't really know how herself either. And there was enmeshment there. So once I started to understand kind of her part in it too, and she wasn't, this, perfect person because nobody is. That was another grief process. But I did go ahead and approach my dad after I'd gotten a lot of support, counseling, and done some work in a small group counseling setting for guys that had experienced sexual abuse as a child and did some role playing there. I went ahead and uh,
Mhm.
did that experience where I confronted my dad about the abuse. It was with great trepidation. Set
Yeah.
a time for that, went to a park, just a neutral place. And, I shared specifically all the things that I had remembered. And, I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to continue a relationship with him. I didn't have to confront that, to have some kind of relationship with him, but it was always something I desired.
Yeah, you could have
Honestly,
remained angry for forever.
you know, I um I get to decide if I want to move forward in forgiveness and a deeper relationship with my dad. I mean, I was on a podcast recently where honestly some of the comments were like, "Well, your dad should have gone to prison. Why are you talking to
Mhm.
him?" And I get to decide, what
Yeah.
I want to do, just like I get to
Well,
decide what to do with my attractions.
yeah, I
And it
think
was
that the
hard work.
biblical mapping on this too, because, not, I mean, every day, even everyday people and probably even some Christians want to justify you in that anger, that place of anger and retaliation or whatever it may be, or punishment. But if you look at the role model of God, which I'm sure that sounds to me like that you have done some studying as it related to this that shaped some of your relationship of forgiveness and building from a different place than what actually occurred. Is that true?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful and important to look
Mm.
at Christ and the precedent that he sets. And I think he honors emotions. He absolutely does. And so I honor that emotion of anger, of resentment, of just complete disdain for him and his actions that would come up. And I also honored the loneliness, the sadness, the grief behind that, and I honored the hope. I didn't want to give up hope for something better, and I wasn't going to let that go either.
So you were
So
pretty empathetic towards him then.
not all the time, not at the beginning.
Yeah.
That grew, and not something anybody can force. But I do have great empathy for him now,
Mhm.
and yeah, he went through a lot. He was really alone. Talk about feeling separate. He definitely did.
Is he
And
married?
my father,
Yeah.
he uh, he was married to my mom for I think about 37 years, and then they got a divorce after I
Mhm.
finished grad school. That was about 2007. He went into the gay lifestyle.
Okay.
Uh, they kind of agreed to have a divorce. It wasn't anything that was a big blow up in the family, but I felt abandoned, that he would leave the family. And that's all I had known, was the four of us together as a nuclear family. And so yeah, I expressed that hurt to him. I feel abandoned, Dad. But he wanted to go try this out. He wanted to try the gay lifestyle out. He thought maybe that was a piece that was missing, that he would feel like he could be more real and authentic by leaning into that part of himself. So ended up getting a partner after, 1 or 2 years, and they were together for a while, um, but it just didn't do it for him. And I think he really missed being with my mom. He shared that with me at the end of his life. He just
Hmm.
missed, I think, some of that stability, probably. I don't know if it was so much that he felt like he made the wrong decision in going into the lifestyle, but he just felt so alone. It gave him a high when he first went into the lifestyle, and he didn't have to fight it anymore, and was able to, be embraced by a really beautiful community. But he ended up going back to being alone, and he and his partner just spent time, the two of them. They were a little bit of an odd match. And I think, my dad just didn't feel completely connected fully to him either. And he got into a place where, he was just having a lot of panic attacks in life. And he just felt like taking his life was going to be a lot easier than living.
Hmm.
And that was about 7 years ago when his partner came home from work and found him in the middle of the act of killing himself in the
Oh, wow.
kitchen of the place that they were staying in. Really traumatic for him, traumatic for all of us. And, I never got to say goodbye to my dad.
Wow. Well, I would imagine there was a lot eating at him, in reflection about, well, a lot of his life, but particularly, what he had done to you. I'm sure that had to have been on his mind as well. And the fact that you were able to forgive him, it still leaves an indentation, I would think, on someone's mind about the trauma and the pain and the hurt that they had caused to someone else. But loss is never easy, I don't think, to deal with. And it sounds to me that you had developed some kind of a genuine relationship with him prior to that taking of his own life that probably still hurts to some degree for you.
I know. I felt like, gosh, we did all this work to connect deeper, and
And
now
then
you're
this.
abandoning me
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah,
Come on, Dad. So I
yeah.
I still I'll go over to his graveside and I'll say, Dad, what were you thinking? Come on, this could have been a lot better.
But
Um,
talk about beauty
yeah.
from ashes, literal ashes here. You you meet someone, pick up again where you met this woman and she herself has been same-sex attracted. You must have had some very interesting conversations before you went on more deeply into that relationship.
Sure. Well, I tell some of the guys I work with that are excited about the idea of dating and marrying a woman, and they're like, "Well, Jason, what was your experience? Telling your the lady for the first time, that you have attractions." And I was like, "Well, I kind of had it easy because she already knew because we were in this group together." So, but even with that, sharing some of the things we had engaged in, some of the trauma, from growing up, I shared that I had um, you know, a, I was in the hospital for, mental lapse back in college, like I shared, and that was probably the most vulnerable thing for me to share. She had some interactions with women that she shared. She knew I really hadn't done anything with guys, and so I think she was a little intimidated by what I might think of her. So, everybody's got their stuff, and I really enjoyed sitting down with her and saying, "Hey, man, I see all of you, and I love you just the same, and even more, because you're sharing this with me and willing to take this courageous risk in this relationship." So, I don't know. Yeah, she's just somebody I really wanted to know, and through that relationship, gotten to know Christ a lot more too, because
How
both
did
of us had to
you
be courageous.
how did you propose to her?
Yeah, I wanted to do this whole big thing, and we went to the Water Gardens in Fort Worth, which was a really beautiful, special place. And I had developed a little scavenger hunt all around the Water Gardens that she would find a little container with pieces of the emails that we had sent back and forth to each other, printed out and cut up and put into there, or collage that I made of photographs of us, Bible verses that were really meaningful. And we went around and collected all of these things that I had placed throughout the water gardens. And then I had a friend that set up some music at a particular location there, and I had the ring with me and knelt down and, asked her if she would marry me. Afterwards, we walked to a different place there, and all of her friends were there waiting for
Oh,
us
wow.
for a little
Nice.
surprise party that I had set up. So it was a really beautiful time. We've taken our kids there and talked to them about what that experience was like with me
So
proposing.
I
We did
think
that on our last
this is
anniversary.
another element. You said you've been married 15 years now,
Yes,
and you have children. How many children?
3 kids, 2 girls and a boy.
So I think that, I want to keep telling stories as I do in the Freedom documentary as well. You get a lot of people who identify as LGBT that say that change is not possible. And I am fully supportive of a person following their own choice and their own desire. But don't put laws in place like these conversion therapy bans and things like that for people who may choose differently than you choose. You decided not to go down that road. You end up marrying and you have 3 children, which I'm sure are have to be, real prizes in your life. And I can't imagine what your relationship must be like with them, given the territory that you had been through and wanting them to have a much different experience with childhood.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't trade it. It's been
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
blessing.
So that's amazing. And, praise God for what he's done for you and the blessing that he's given you through a wife and through children. What's also even more interesting to me too is that you've become a coach for men and men with same-sex attraction. And I believe that you have a kind of a system developed that I think involves the 4 S's. If you would explain that to viewers, that would be, I'd appreciate that.
For sure. I think it can be helpful to have frameworks to take something again that's really complex and help to simplify it, because a lot of guys are like, I don't even know where to start. That was me.
Yeah.
But I've talked a little bit about that idea of separateness being what I believe is the biggest driver of unwanted same-sex attractions. So that's my first S, is separateness. That can be separate from masculinity, from your body, from the belief that you have what it takes to make it in life. Then there's a sensation. I talked about that a little bit too. Often it felt like electricity coming up through my body. It's a really intense feeling. Other times it felt like that, romantic feeling that would come in. So that's the second S, sensation. And then the third S is sin. And
Mhm.
again, I
Mhm.
think you could define that as just anything we choose to go to for something only God can give us.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, going to look at gay porn was something that I was trying to get something from doing that, that was in place of what God wanted to give me. And, I don't have to take any shame with that. I think shame is not helpful. So we usually try to take that off the table. But I can be convicted about it and say, man, there's something so much better out there. But then the fourth S is story. That's one of the most things I'm most passionate about, really, because, I think my dad told himself a lot of stories. You mentioned it. I can't read his mind, but maybe towards the end of his life, he's like, "Oh, I've done too many bad things. I don't deserve help." I don't know. Um, or, I told myself the story that because I had these attractions that I was even less of a man, or, that I was broken. Well, it wasn't true at all. Or I told myself the story that because of the sin that I committed, that, maybe God is more interested in using somebody else for his purposes than me. And often those stories are what can keep us stuck, keep us from contributing powerfully to God's work here on earth. And that's what I start with when I work with guys. All right, what's the story? You're telling yourself about your attractions, about how you measure up to another man, how God sees you after you sin. And then we'll kind of work backwards. So regarding sin, how can we make God look really attractive so that we turn to him first? How can we develop some emotional resilience? And then with the sensation. How can we observe that from a place of neutrality and just let it kind of come and go without needing to really attach to it or put a meaning to it? I have a podcast episode that's called He's an Attractive Guy, period. And what I mean by that is I can look at a guy and say, he's attractive. I don't need to go, and that means I'm not. And, I want to be intimate with him. And if I only knew him better, if he would only like me, I don't need to go into all that. That's usually the drama associated with it. So we may have a feeling that comes up in our body. We can just say it is what it is. And then you go back to the separateness, and that's a lot of that deeper work
Yeah.
on, how we can honor that boy, inside of us. That's often the one that's reaching, for something else. And how I can tell him that, hey, you do have a voice, in Christ, you do have what it takes. And I can be
Mhm.
that big brother to my younger self that felt alone so much of the time.
Mhm.
But I can also get really curious about what were some of those lies that Satan handed me? What were some of those beliefs, some of those rules that I made for myself? Like, if I'm able to call myself a man, then I need to achieve this or do that. That's a rule that somehow came up in life. I don't know where I decided that was true, but if I don't have awareness of what those are, then I can't choose something better. And that's where we get into choosing what it is that we really
Mhm.
want to identify with, right? Get curious about what does God say about me
Yeah.
and own our identity. And that own your identity, it has two meanings. Its deepest meaning is who are we in Christ?
Mhm.
How can we believe that his death on the cross and him coming towards us solves that problem of separateness that began in the garden when sin first entered the world? I
Yeah.
think, this kind of small piece of separateness that may kind of feel like we're separate from other people or from ourselves or men, I mean, that's just a symptom of the greater problem in the world that God came to solve, and that we, can turn towards him to just receive that gift of
Mhm.
his son on the cross, that relationship that we can have with him. But it's a beautiful thing to be able to go through these four parts of same-sex attraction and honor each of them, to get curious about each of them and where we are, to see God in it. That was a way to know him more, and then that inspires us to make him known more to other people.
Yeah, so I lived deeply in the LGBT community for 40 years. And then I came and sat down. Well, it was over a period of time, but specifically one day I asked God what he wanted from me because I knew what my destiny was if I kept living the way I was living. I knew the Bible. I grew up on the Bible. So um, I God convicted me that what I needed to develop was intimacy with him and getting to know him. And when I came back into the church or back to Christ, I found, which I think is still the situation today, that pastors everywhere are just not prepared to know how to help men who have lived, various portions of their life with same-sex attraction and going down the road of self and self pleasure rather than self denial. And if you talk to any church member, they don't like to talk a whole lot about self denial. As it relates to food or pornography or women or whatever the case may be. And so I found that it is very valuable to have people such as yourself that are able to mentor people. My pastor didn't know what to do with all my baggage that I brought with me. And so it's really vitally important that when someone comes back to Christ, that they have somewhere where they can talk about these things. And so I applaud you for taking the helm and showing people how they can have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and how their feelings don't have to direct their future, and their feelings don't have to be their identity. And I've said to a lot of people when I've spoken, I think that the length of time somebody lives in a world that is full of pleasure and sin in a way that God didn't intend, that has an effect on how deeply you'll be tempted when you give your life back over to Christ, because Satan's not happy that you have decided to follow Jesus instead of your flesh. And so it's important, I think, to have people. again, like yourself, that can help walk somebody through. If someone experiences failure, I experienced failure even after I came to Christ. That cost me my ministry at one point in time. And so we don't talk about faith and failure in the church very much. And I think it's so very important to help somebody know that God has not abandoned them and God hasn't given up on them. So we shouldn't give up on them either.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
You not only have your own counseling that you do through your own your identity, but you also are involved in something that I've heard very little about, but I've heard just enough to be curious, and that's a program called Husband Material. Can you talk to
Yeah.
me about that program?
Sure. Yes, I'm a certified husband material coach and very grateful to be a part of that community. Their motto is "We help men outgrow porn." So that community is for any guy out there that is struggling with giving up that habit. And they really are into the model of let's talk about the boy that got addicted to porn. They
Hmm.
say, it's the boy that got addicted to porn, not necessarily the man. It's that boy inside that was really longing to feel alive, to um, just get his sense of curiosity satiated, whatever it is. Honestly, that is something that they really work hard to do, and then get curious about those longings. You're not afraid to state what your fantasies are, or to just understand that we can get curious and learn from even the type of porn that we're drawn to. It doesn't mean we need to describe it in detail, but to say, like for me, I'm really, uh, I think about the locker room scene, just that might be a scene that I put in a search term when I'm looking at porn, when I used to. And that does say a lot to know that it's because I want to belong. I want to feel like I'm one of the guys. I want to feel like I'm, part of the team and that we're in this together and I'm in a common scenario, where guys are just say, you're like me, I'm like you. And, that's just kind of a little bit of a window into my younger self that didn't get that sense of belonging. So it's really great. And then they also focus on the future. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to become? And how can we fan the flame and get you there?
And helping these guys get victory over porn so that's not a focus in their life anymore.
Correct.
Great. So we'll put up a link to that program as well. Um, what would you say before we conclude here? What would be your advice to parents who have children identifying? Today it's no longer about just coming out and being gay, but the trans thing, there's so many, different letters involved in this acronym now. And many of it, or much of it is brought about today by social media. I used to think that it happened more organically, sometimes out of abuse. But today it's a lot of peers say to one another, you don't know who you are until you've tried it all. What do you say to a parent in a Christian family who's trying to lead their child along Christian principles? How do they make an attachment to a relative relationship with Christ through this part of their lives?
First, speaking to the parents, I want you to know that you're not alone. That it's gonna be okay. You're gonna get through it. I know, if you have a child that's decided to identify as gay or trans or move in those directions, it can feel like the loss of a dream. I'm sure, that when you had kids, you thought about becoming grandparents. And I know there's magical medical ways of those things happening still, but, thought of a father giving his daughter away, to a man at the wedding. So I first want to honor you. I know that can be a really challenging thing emotionally to deal with. I will say, when your kid is telling you for the first time, it may be a shock to you, but it's something that's been on their heart for many, many years, most likely, and it is good that they're trusting you with that. And who knows, how they're going to respond, to you if maybe they push you away for a while or maybe they don't. I think what's really important is to always be that open door for them. They know what you believe. You don't have to hit them over the head with it. Uh, make make Christ look attractive. It's the father that took the prodigal son home and was always there on the front porch, thinking about
Man.
him,
Yeah.
and didn't say, "Well, told you so," or "That was a terrible idea."
Yeah.
um,
So
just
expressing love and making sure that that you listen, even though you may
yeah,
not agree, it's so important to listen.
don't come at it with fear,
Yeah.
because they're probably scared enough. You don't need to
Yeah.
feed any fear, maybe that they're already feeling. Um, just show up with love, show up um, with the idea that, shame is just not a part of any way that they view you or the situation, or you view them, excuse me. But um, decide what it is that you want them to feel. Do you want them to feel empowered and safe and loved? And make sure you're showing up that way with them in every interaction, every message with them. And trust God, that they're in His hands. You don't need to try to control. You don't need to try to fix it. Um, don't need
Yeah.
to obsess about it. Just be there for them, love them, and God will do the work.
Yeah. Awesome. You, your wife is Teresa?
Yes.
And I originally I'd invited to have her on as well, but I she's not always comfortable in getting into these circumstances of always having to be that transparent. I think that's hard for anybody. But you sent me a link that has a link to her story as well. And so
Yes.
I will be putting that in the description of this podcast so that people who are interested and want to know another side of Jason, you can find out about his wife there. Um, if you've been blessed by this podcast, I want you to be sure and click the like button on it and then be sure and click subscribe. Let your friends know about this. I think probably more people have probably had similar experiences to you than we really know about because it's not something, particularly in the church environment, that has been, very open information over the years. But I want to thank you so much, Jason, for sharing today. And it was a blessing to me. I know will be to others. And I'll put a link up to your website and also to the other ministry as well. So thanks so much for joining me. And thanks everybody for watching. And I will see you again next week.